Hi students, this lecture session is about basic building blocks and user interface components in Android. This session is part of RSET Online for Semester 6 students of EC branch under KTU. I'm Seema Safar, Assistant Professor, Rajagiri School of Engineering and Technology. I'll be handling the topic of Module 5, Basic Building Blocks and User Interface Components in Android. The topic is planned in such a way that first I'll be giving you an introduction to the basic building blocks in Android application development. Then I'll be focusing on details of some Android components like activity, content providers. After that, I'll be discussing about user interface components in Android. Let's begin our session by understanding the basic building blocks in an Android application. There are 5 basic application components that can be used while developing our Android application. The first one is activity. Second one being intents. Third one, broadcast receivers. Fourth one, content providers. And the fifth one is services. Let's understand each component one by one. Let's try to understand the first application components. Activities in an Android. An activity represents a single screen with a user interface. What do you understand from that? Any screen that you see in your smartphone which interacts with the user is an activity. For example, this picture shows a contacts app which you have seen in your smartphone, right? There you can see a list of contacts beginning with an alphabet E. Similarly, in your contacts app, you have provisions to add a contact and to search for the contacts, right? Now I'll show you another picture. Now this picture shows an activity of contact app showing the contact information of a particular person. So in short, what do you mean by an activity? What does it act like? It acts as an entry point for the users to interact with the app. Alright? The second application component in Android, intents. Intents in Android is a messaging object which is used to request an action from another app component, such as activities, services, broadcast receivers, and content providers. Also, it is meant to perform certain functionalities like starting an activity, starting a service, delivering a broadcast. All these technical terms like service, broadcast will be explained in the coming slides. So what did you understand from that? Why do we use an intent? Intent is meant to help us to maintain the communication between app components from the same application as well as with the components of other applications. Now let's discuss about the third component in Android, services. Service is a component that is used to perform operations on the background. What do you mean by performing operations on the background? When it comes to smartphone, the examples are playing music, handling network transactions, etc. So a service may not be having any user interfaces. A service will be running in background indefinitely even if the application is destroyed. Now, another thing to note is that there are 2 forms of services that are supported in Android, and they'll be following 2 different paths. These are the 2 different services. One is the unbounded service and the second one is bounded service. Now, suppose that I want to play a music in background. then it will be invoking unbounded service. Unbounded service is started when the component like activity calls start service method and the activity begins to work. Activity is activated by invoking onCreate method and the service starts running by invoking start service method in Android. And finally, when the service is stopped by itself or a client, it shut down the service. This is how unbounded service works. Now let's see how the bounded service, or what is the scenario where a bounded service is being invoked. Consider a situation where I'm playing music as in my phone and I want to get an information of the current song that is being played. Then I will need to bind the service to provide the information about the current song. Now what is happening inside is that a call to a bind service method is invoked inside our smartphone and the corresponding activity is created and the binding is invoked by using a method onBind, and after all the clients have unbound by calling an unbind service method, the service gets shut down. This is how the service component in Android works. Now let's discuss about broadcast receivers, which is another Android component. These are Android components that allow a system to deliver events to the app, like sending a low battery message to the app. Now the Android components which allow you to send or receive Android system or application events can be called as a broadcast receiver. In Androids, broadcast receivers are implemented as a subclass of broadcast receiver, and each broadcast is delivered as an intent object. So, you can see an Android system and a broadcast receiver. Applications can register for various system events like boot complete or battery low, and Android systems can send broadcast when the specific event has occurred. This is an example which shows the battery level and the charging state level of an Android device, which can be implemented using broadcast receivers. Here's another example of an alarm clock, which again is an example of broadcast receiver. Now let's discuss about content providers in Android. Every application will be having data and some storage space for storing these data as well, right? Android is also an Android application. So this app should have some storage space to store those data. Here comes the relevance of using content providers. Content providers will act as a central repository to store the data of the application in one place and make that data available for different applications to access whenever it is required. So it's more like a relational database to store the app data. Next, we'll discuss about the additional components in Android. In Android, we have additional components in order to build a relationship between the basic building blocks to implement our application logic. There are 5 of them. The first one is fragment. Fragments are components which is used to represent the portion of user interface in an activity. Layouts. They are used to describe user interface for an activity or app. Then we have views. Views are used to build a user interface for an app using UI elements like buttons, list, etc. Then we have resources. Resources are actually used to build an Android app by making use of external elements like images, audio files, other than coding. Then we have manifest file. Manifest file is a file uh, which is always called as in all application. It is having the name Android manifest.xml. It's a configuration file for the application which contains information about activities, intents, content providers, services, broadcast receivers, permissions of an application. Now let's discuss about activities in detail. Recall what you have studied in your previous slide. Activities represent a single screen with a user interface, right? And it acts as an entry point for the users to interact with that. And we have seen two examples of a contact app which has more than one screens. Though they have more than one screens, they are connected and each screen can be considered as an activity. Now here's another example of an activity. As we know, any app that we have developed can contain multiple activities. Usually, one activity is marked as a main activity. Normally, the first screen that we expect to appear while we launch the application is considered as the main activity. Now, how can we use these activities in application? In order to use such activities in an application, we need to register those activities information in our app's manifest file. Hope you remember what is Android manifest file. And we need to manage the activity lifecycle appropriately. Every activity passes through a lifecycle. We'll be explaining shortly about the lifecycle of an activity. Now let's discuss how we can define an activity in a manifest file. In order to use activities in our application, we need to define activities with the required attributes inside the manifest file. Android manifest file is an XML file, so everything in that particular file will be written in the form of tags. XML is extended markup language. So this is the beginning. Here I've included a pseudocode showing the skeleton of the tags. Manifest is the outermost layer. Inside that we have the application. Inside that we have the activity tag. And I have mentioned Android -- name equal to main activity. So I have defined my main activity there. And the corresponding closed statement or the closing activity tag is provided with a /activity, and the closing tag of the application tag is /application, and for manifest it's /manifest. So this one and this one will be defining an activity in manifest file. Now let's discuss about activity lifecycle in an Android. The activities in Android passes through a series of states during its lifetime. They make use of callback methods at different stages. This figure depicts the lifecycle of an activity in an Android application. There are 6 callback methods which is being invoked during the lifecycle of an activity. The first one is onCreate method. OnCreate method is initiated when the system creates an activity for the first time. Android system initiates its program within an activity by invoking onCreate callback method. Then we have onStart method. This method will be invoked when activity is entered into a start state by completing onCreate method. Now, this method makes an activity visible to the user and the method execution will finish very quickly. Then we have onResume method when activity is entered into resume state. Now, resume method in the state activity starts interacting with the user. The app will stay in this state until another activity comes into focus. Then we have onPause state. Now, onPause method resume state invokes onPause method if some interruption occurs. Now, after the activity returns from the pause state, it moves to resume state. This depicts a scenario where you people gets a phone call while watching a video. Okay. Now, when you get a phone call while watching your video in your phone, your video goes to a pause state, right? And after that, after completion of your phone call, the video is resumed to the place where it got interrupted, right? Then we have, after completion of an onPause method execution, the next method is onStop. This is invoked when an activity is no longer visible to user. Now, after the app process is killed, this moves on to onCreate method. And once the user navigates to the activity after onStop, it is restarted and moves on to a onStart method. Then we have the last and the final callback method, onDestroy method, when the activity is finishing or destroyed by the system. This is how the life cycle of activity works. Now let's discuss about UI components in Android. All the interactions of a user with the Android application is through user interface or UI. Therefore, it is important to understand the basics about the user interface of an Android application. Now, the UI components can be either in the form of views or in the form of notifications. Views are actually a rectangular area on the screen which is responsible for drawing and event handling. And notifications are messages that Android displays outside your app's user interface in order to provide users with reminders or communication from other people or other timely information from your app, so that the users can tap the notification to open your app or take actions directly for notifications. Views in Android. View is the basic building block of user interface in Android. It refers to Android.view.view class, which is the superclass for all GUI or graphical user interface components. There are two approaches for creating views. One is programmatic and the second one is declarative approach. Now, programmatic approach is where you define views in the Java source file, and declarative approach is where you either directly design your XML files or you do it like mostly drag and drop. Now let's see some of the commonly used views. Now this is a text view where it displays text to the user and optionally allows to edit it programmatically. Now this is a checkbox view, which is a specific type of two-state button that can be either checked or unchecked. Then we have image view, which is used to display an image file in application. Now this is an edit text view, which is a subclass of text view with text editing operations. Then we have a radio button view, where there are several radio buttons lying inside a radio group, and when you check on one radio button, it unchecks the others. This is an image button view. And finally, this is a button view. Now, what is button? Button is a component that can be pressed or clicked by the user to perform some actions. That's all for this session. If you have any queries or doubts, you can email me or contact me. Thank you.